we have really, I'm actually very excited because we have some incredible experts today that are going to be answering questions that everyone wants the answers to in relation to COVID-19. Now, as you guys all know, we're in the second half of our lockdown. So I'm just going to get right into it because I think we have very little time. Our two guests today are Ambassador Federico Salas, who is Ambassador for Mexico to India. Ambassador Salas, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And then we are also joined by Mr. Sunjoy Joshi, who is the chairperson of the ORF, or the Observer Research Foundation. Mr. Joshi, thank you as well for being here, and namaste to both of you. Mr. Joshi here? Can you hear me? I think I saw him just 1 second ago.
I think he's not there.
He's here, but his microphone is off.
Can you hear me? I
can barely, I can very barely hear you.
Okay, let me try something else. Let me try and connect on the mobile.
Okay. All right. Well, we're happy to have you here, and I think once we can hear you, we'll get to questions. But let me just get right into the first question. Perhaps for Ambassador Salas. Why don't you tell us a little bit about? Now, I was looking at a few reports, the latest reports from Mexico. And I think the latest figures from what I saw, I'll just name approximate figures because I don't know the exact, but about 6,875 cases and 546 deaths as of April 18, 2020. Of course, that's approximation. The figures are varying a little bit, but can you elaborate a little bit on measures taken by Mexico, your point of view on Mexico's preparedness and response as compared to India's preparedness and response?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, as you say, those are approximately the figures, which are, of course, changing from day to day as the pandemic evolves. So whatever we're talking about right now is probably going to be different in just a few hours. But those figures are. And I think it's interesting, these figures are interesting because they're somewhat comparable to the figures here in India. However, you have to take into account that the population of Mexico is 10 times less than the population of India. Right. So proportionally speaking, what is happening in Mexico today has a larger dimension than what's happening here. I guess like many other countries, the same type of measures of social distancing, of asking people to stay at home as much as possible, every precaution that is recommended, wash your hands, use all of that is being done. We are right now in what they call phase 2 of the problem, probably entering phase 3 in the next the very near foreseeable future. And we have, as far as the preparedness is concerned, I think that you have to take into account that this will probably be a test case of basically an emerging economy with great difficulties in terms of comparably speaking to what the Europeans or the Americans or Canadians are going through. Our hospital resources, our medical resources are more modest in that regard. However, we have been acquiring all sorts of equipment and protective equipment for the health the people who are in the health services, ventilators, etc. Right now, since 4 days ago, we started having daily shipments of equipment going back and forth. Well, actually from China to Mexico, buying equipment from China to Mexico to attend, what we fear will be a growing problem in the next few days and weeks. It's of course it's a very difficult situation, and but right now that's where we are. The other issue, which I think is interesting, is that the Mexican situation is very comparable to the one here in India, in the sense that we have, as it is in India, a large sector of the population in what we call the informal economy. That is, people who are, street vendors and things like that. And it's very, very difficult to have these people stay at home without them being affected economically in a very, very serious way. And this is something that is going to be very much of a challenge in Mexico, how to meet the immediate demands of particularly food and health services for these people in the future. And that is going to be, like it is being here in India, with where we also have migrating workers from one place to another. It's a very comparable situation. So we just at this point, have to hope for the best.
Great. And Mr. Joshi, just as a follow-up to what the ambassador has said, first of all, before we get into migrant workers, the informal economy and the unorganized sectors of the economy as well, why don't you tell me a little bit about, or tell all of us a little bit about India's preparedness and response. Now, the Prime Minister has addressed the nation 4 times. Restrictions are going to be eased, I hope, in the next few days. I think we're all hoping for that. But what is your take on India's preparedness response, where we are now with COVID-19 and the way it's being dealt with?
Microphone.
Mr. Joshi, are you there? Are you able to fix your mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Shoot.
If you look, Priyanka, the evolution of COVID-19 and the way it has hit the world, the timelines make it very clear that it has taken the whole world relatively unprepared. There's no country which is prepared to deal with something.
Okay.
And as you see the responses, what you are seeing world over is that most countries find that they are being thrown into completely unknown territory. It's like, swimming in uncharted waters. You don't even know how to swim. You're learning how to swim as you are drowning. And that is the condition not just of the developing world, it is very much the condition of the developed world as well. You see the strongest nation in the world today having the highest death rate, 40,000 dead and counting. So, this is a challenge which has been unforeseen in many ways. So everyone has been scrambling to put things together. And the challenge in countries like India naturally has been, and which is also the challenge in Mexico, that you have very underserved health services. Your doctor population ratio is amongst the lowest in the world. Your staff, the supporting ancillary health staff, you don't have the capabilities. So ramping up takes time. Besides that, we have not been geared up for testing. We were not prepared for it. And that is a state with most countries. Every country you go to, including France, including the United Kingdom, and including the USA, they all say we are not testing enough. They're rapidly trying to ramp up testing, and yet testing has been lagging behind. Countries which have done very well with testing, like Germany, who had good health infrastructure, have performed much better. You see, they have handled the situation much better. But other countries are struggling to cope. The strategy always has been, we've all run their pandemic models, the various kinds of models floating around. It is extremely difficult to get the balance because there are differences between models and models. Okay. So the response that has come is accordingly calculated. you have a lockdown. Most countries opted for a lockdown. Some did not opt for a complete lockdown. Time will tell us which strategy is correct. It's too early to do a post-mortem of various strategies, I think. Countries opted for lockdowns. The problem with lockdowns is that you cannot shut down the economy in this way. You know, it's not like a tap which can be turned off. The consequences to lockdown are also enormous. And if you see the debate as it has been, coming out in India over the last few days also, you are now thinking of a calibrated exit. Now, calibrated exit always has risks. But then these are risks which, because this is not really a battle between lives and livelihoods, they're both intrinsically linked to each other. What is the choice? If you have so many people, so much migrant labor, so many poor people who earn every day, who if they do not earn during the day, do not know where their next meal is going to come from. And in a country the size of India, you can do whatever you want. It is impossible to feed each and every one of them, to monitor that feeding mechanisms, to get systems in place. Charities are doing great work. NGOs are doing great work. Many government institutions have stepped up and trying to do some work. But the problem is that handling a humongous population of this size, handling the distress involved is not going to be easy. So then you start thinking in terms of a calibrated lockdown, release from lockdown, where you start thinking of what are the activities which can be started. So India has, yes, said that as of date today, certain areas are opening up, but there's a very carefully calibrated easing of the lockdown which is going to take place. There are parts of the economy which are going to start. First of all, what has been started officially is the primary thing is agriculture, food production, anything related to food production, to get a supply chains working along that. You see, starting agriculture is one thing. I don't think anyone could have ever shut down agriculture. Agriculture is not under lockdown, was never under lockdown. But getting the supply chains for agriculture, making sure that the produce reaches the mandi, that there is someone in the mandis to pick it up, and it is done while you maintain social distancing norms. Now that is going to be the challenge. So it is a huge challenge, which countries like India, countries like Mexico are facing. And let me say one thing, that you are confronted with a situation where whichever choice you make, answer is ultimately suboptimal. The answer is never going to be perfect. You are going to make mistakes. There are going to be errors. There are going to be unforced errors which are going to take place. This is completely new territory. We have not seen anything like this.
Thank you for that answer. And I'm glad that you mentioned a calibrated lockdown, because that is exactly what is happening now. Ambassador Salas, follow up to that description that Mr. Joshi gave. Do you feel that now the PM has, I'll just put it this way, PM has basically stated in more than one of his addresses to the nation, to people, that yes, the economy is going to be hit, but it is people's lives that matter most. However, in a situation like India and in Mexico, as you said before, we are sort of emerging countries, emerging economies, where a lot of sectors are unorganized and calibrated lockdown is necessary. What's your take on this statement that, are we a place, is Mexico and is India, are they countries where we should just continue with the lockdown and focus on people's lives? Or is something like a calibrated sort of opening of sections necessary, and how long does that take? What are the timelines that we are looking at?
Well, as was just said, we're in an uncharted territory in every possible way. It's very difficult to answer something like that, of course, and making a choice between the lives of people and the livelihood of people. I think that we rather not make those choices. In other words, we're trying to see, I think many countries are trying to have, both responsibilities. In other words, save the lives of the health of the people that are being affected, as well as the livelihood. I think it's very, very important to keep that in mind. it's a tremendous challenge. It's not an easy task to do, and again, I think for me it's very interesting to observe what is being done here in India, and how sort of specific areas are being kept separate in a lockdown situation, because they are considered to be like red spots or hot spots of infection, and other areas, especially in primary sectors like agriculture and whatnot, are beginning to open very slowly. In Mexico, we're not there yet. We're still at the sort of like the early stages of a lockdown, which is not, mind you, as rigid as the one that has been presented here in India. For example, international flights, commercial flights are still coming into Mexico. This is something that we have not stopped. Transportation within the country is still taking place. We are, of course, asking people to do not take unnecessary trips anywhere, and to stay at home as much as possible. But so the regulations in Mexico have not been as strict as the ones here. Again, trying to find a balance between the question of protecting the lives of those that may be affected and the livelihood. Coming back to the numbers that you quoted at the very beginning, we're still sort of at an earlier stage. So the sense of an overarching emergency throughout the country is not so visible in Mexico yet. Some parts of the country, for example, cities like Tijuana in the northern border with California, are being very seriously affected right now, and they're having already hospital saturation, like what is happening in other parts of the world. But other parts of the country are not having this problem at this point. So I wouldn't say that there's a sense of complacency. It's not that, but it's sort of like as it's kind of a slow motion type of situation, and we're taking the measures or the appropriate, what we hope is appropriate measures as the situation evolves. It's very, very complex, certainly, and if we are lucky, and the measures that we are applying are the correct ones, and we're not doing anything that is not being done in other parts of the world either. Hopefully, the numbers will not have a spike that would be very dramatic in Mexico. But it is a very serious challenge. Now, of course, the question is not only what is happening now, but what we can do or what happens later. And this is something that I think all the countries have to be thinking forward-looking to what the post-COVID-19 world is going to look like, including in the economic aspect. In other words, what are we going to do to revive the economy? What are we going to do to recover the jobs that are being lost? What are we going to do to, these people that are migrating from one part of the countries to the other, get them back to where they were before this whole problem began? All of that is going to be major challenges. Will require enormous resources to do all of this, and so this is something but as I said, this is something that will come after the major health emergency is over. So it's still to be seen what we're going to do about that.
Right. And just to float off of that question, Mr. Joshi, let's look at the way forward now. There is a sort of calibrated lockdown taking place where sections are slowly and strategically being opened. Now, what exactly are we looking at in terms of economic impact in India? And in terms of, as the ambassador was saying, in terms of jobs, in terms of the unorganized sector, in terms of our migrant workers, what hit are we going to take? And when are we going to see economic revival, if there is such a thing?
First of all, a correction of nuance. I don't think it is time yet to start talking of a post-COVID world. The fact is, we are going to be living in a COVID world for at least another 1 or 2 years, if not more. This is going to, we are going to have to live with the fact that you have a pandemic called Corona, COVID-19, which is going to be affecting people, and you're going to be in a position where you're going to simultaneously, on the one side, be ramping up your health systems to be able to take care of people who cannot help themselves. As it is, COVID is not a death sentence, but yes, there are people, a percentage of people out of 100 people, 85, nothing happens. But 15, you do need hospitalization. Some of them need intensive care. So we'll need to, and the numbers, as they become large, you will need to ramp up your facilities. You will need to ramp up protective equipment for your health workers. You need to protect your health workers, which is going to be most important. So first of all, you are going to, the economy comes later. The first most important thing which countries will need to do over the next 2 years, 3 years, is going to be ramping up their health infrastructure, strengthening the hand of the health staff in the field, because they are going to be at the front line battling this COVID world. The post-COVID world is going to take some time till you get a vaccine in place, till you get lots of, the larger size population develops immunity. It's not even very clear if the immunity, once it develops, really lasts and how long it lasts. So, all these are things which we're still discovering. So let us start thinking in terms of living with COVID. And how do you then get your economy back on track? So you are following a strategy. You're saying today, okay, we will start containing zones. We will contain hotspots. We will let activities resume in other parts. Now that works as long as your containment becomes effective, because there are going to be leakages in containment. So you will have hotspots emerging first in one place, maybe you'll have some hotspots emerging in another place. The time you take to identify them, close them off, contain the further spread. How do you slow the spread of the disease so that your health systems start coping with it? So when you do it this way, your economic recovery is going to be slow, it is going to be gradual, it is going to be segmented. It is going to be segmented geographically, it is going to be segmented sector-wise. Certain essential areas which are unavoidable, the food production, food supply, those have to get on track, first of all. Then come the other parts, everything which is related with health. That needs to come up. You have to start getting those sectors, those manufacturing units back into production, which means if they need workers, you will need to move those workers. You will need to start opening up public transportation. How do they get to work? Or how do you make arrangements for them to stay where they are? Now, various states are going to be following different strategies. So in a country like the size of India, you are going to see a response which may differ in a sense from state to state. India is a federal country. And in my opinion, it is not the best option to do a top-down handling, a top-down management of the response to COVID. You will need to give discretion to states to take on the task to assess the ground situation, because they are better, they know better, they know their area better to how to handle the situations. So greater devolution of power in handling the pandemic to the state, greater devolution of power even lower down to the districts. These kinds of steps will have to be taken so that both sides are balanced. You will have to strike a balance. That balance is not going to be perfect all the time, but there are risks which you will have to take, because this is a long battle. You cannot shut down the economy for 2 years.
Thank you for that answer. And now, Ambassador Salas, let's talk a little bit about, I think Mr. Joshi did an excellent job of describing the domestic scenario, but let's talk a little bit about relations using maybe India and Mexico as a case study. In 2018, the trade between India and Mexico was approximately $10 billion. Mexico invests in Indian companies, India invests in Mexican companies. Both India exports to Mexico, Mexico exports to India. A lot of, quite a few actually, I think Cinepolis and I forget the other one now, but fairly well-known MNC. Yes, there we go, that was one. MNCs are also very, very much present in India. How do you see our relationship, the Indian and Mexican relationship going forward? Is there scope for more collaboration as we both try to revive our economies? As Mr. Joshi said, we are going to be in a COVID world for the next couple of years, as everyone's, it's not just India and Mexico that's been, it's over 145 countries that are facing sort of economic challenges right now. So as we all try to revive our economies, how do you see India and Mexican relations going forward in terms of trade, in terms of however you want to? I'll let you go for it.
No, that certainly it's a very interesting and complex question, because as you were saying, I think that before all of this began, I think that everything just looked very rosy in terms of the future of the bilateral relationship between Mexico and India. Mexico has become the second largest trading partner of India in the Americas after the United States. As you said, it was a volume of $10 billion a year, quite considerable. And India had become, I believe it was the ninth largest trading partner of Mexico in the world, as well as investments in both directions. There's about 120 Indian investment corporations, businesses investing in Mexico, and something like 20 some that have been Mexican ones that have invested here in India. So the conditions were there for a good, prosperous, growing, and deepening relationship. I have asked myself this question very much also, as you know, what is going to happen now? We're going to, of course, going to be facing an enormous challenge. You know, one of the issues that I think is going to happen to many of us is that, of course, our economies are going to slow down to a considerable extent because of the impact that this is taking place. In the case of Mexico, we're already not growing at the level that we had hoped that we would be growing. So having a downturn of this is going to send us into negative numbers. India, as well as China, according to the figures of the International Monetary Fund, are also going to have a slower growth, but still growth, comparatively speaking, because their numbers were relatively high before the pandemic began. So I think that not only Mexico, but all the countries in the world are going to be looking at both China and India as probably the two motors that are going to somehow, we would hope, be pulling up, the world economy. And it's going to be a competitive and very challenging environment that we're going to be facing. But having said that, I think that it's, of course, is going to be very difficult, especially, when you look at single cases. Just yesterday, I was talking with the executives of Cinépolis, which, as you know, it's a movie business, and they were the first ones that had to shut down. They shut down all the movie theaters, and at this point, they don't know what kind of numbers they're going to end up with once this opens up again, and whether if the lockdown here in India ends on May the 3rd, as we are expecting right now, whether movie theaters will actually be, opening immediately, because of course, by their own nature, movie theaters, tend to, pull people together in what exactly we're trying to avoid to do right now. So businesses like this are, of course, probably going to have to, face a very difficult situation, and I don't know exactly where they're going to be standing in 2 weeks' time. But having said that, I do hope that we will slowly be able to take up more or less where we left off, and that I think that the basic elements of what had made the bilateral relationship from the economic point of view a good one will still be there, and I think it's something that we can still move forward and enhance the economic relationship that we have between Mexico and India. On the other aspects of the relationship, of course, on the political side, the cultural side, the educational side, there's many things that will have to start almost from scratch. We had a large number of students, Mexican students, for example, here in India, all of whom have left. They went home. because the universities closed down, dormitories closed down, so they had to leave, they had to go back home. So eventually they're going to have to wait for the normal academic cycles to start back again here in India. And I hope that some of them can come back, because of course it's always an expensive trip to make the travel from Mexico to India or vice versa. So these are the kind of issues that I think it's going to take a while. As Mr. Joshi was saying, I think what I was referring to for a post-COVID-19 world, I meant basically going through the emergency that we're in right now, hoping that we can overcome this, or at least try to get to deal with the future right after the major emergency. So, but this is going to be with us for a long time. It's not something that we're going to. So the consequences of it and trying to get back on track as to where we were before is going to be a very slow process. And we'll just have to see how best we can do with it.
Great, thank you for that, Ambassador. And I think we just, Mr. Joshi, I'll leave the last question to you, because I think we just have 5 minutes of time before we open it up to the audience and to those on call to ask questions. Now, especially young people, I work a lot with youth and young working professionals, youth across the world. Now, I have lived in multiple countries. I speak to my friends in other countries very frequently to ask them what their situation is like, what their circumstances are like. Lot of social distrust, I would say, is taking place. And one of the main reasons, I would say, is a lot of fake information and misinformation on COVID-19. Another thing, another sort of phenomenon that's happening is a lot of, I don't want to say blame game, but a lot of antagonizing China, especially among the youth. So, Mr. Joshi, I just want to put it to you, what do you have to say? Do we need increased surveillance or perhaps regulation in news, fake news that's going on, especially that on social media? What needs to be done to get the correct information? And also, is it fair to sort of blame China for this? Because that's what's happening amongst youth on social media pretty frequently since this has happened.
Sorry, I think I missed the audio a little bit, but let quickly respond to your question. On the question of China, my own point of view is that at the moment we're in the middle of a crisis, you're fighting, you're trying to put out a fire. So the blame game can wait, the scapegoating can wait. Yes, there are deficiencies. There are deficiencies in the way China shared information. There are deficiencies maybe in the way WHO responded to the COVID threat. But at the moment, we need to come together to fight this together and then learn lessons from this. And when we start rebuilding our multilateral global institutions, when we start rebuilding the global response to this pandemic, because the pandemic teaches us one thing, that you do live, you may hate it, you may love it, whatever you do, but you do live in a globalized world. COVID, if it has to go from across the world. If COVID cases remain in sub-Saharan Africa, it is not that America is going to be safe. It is going to be unsafe. So it needs to be eradicated everywhere, and therefore everyone needs to work together and then start building the institutions which can take care of the correct institutions with the right responses, and countries to be transparent enough in sharing the information at the right time so that something like COVID-19 does not occur again, or that everyone then knows how better to respond to it. This time, in spite of the fact that we should not have been, because we faced MERS,